My grandmother left me a dilapidated house in a village as my inheritance, while my brother received a 3-bedroom apartment in the capital. My husband called me a failure and kicked me out. Desperate, I traveled to the village, and the moment I stepped inside that house, I was stunned. Before we continue, please comment below, and let me know which country you're watching this video from. Enjoy. The air in the notary's office was thick with tension so palpable, you could almost touch it. Olga felt it growing with every heartbeat, tightening her chest. The room smelled of old paper and mustiness, as if only shadows of the past lingered here. The lawyer, a gaunt man in a formal suit, cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began reading the will of Maria Stepanovna, their grandmother. Anton, Olga's older brother, lounged smugly in his chair. He had always been Grandma's favorite, a successful businessman living in the capital. Olga, by contrast, seemed like a shadow in his presence, quiet, modest, working as a librarian. She'd always felt undervalued, as though her very existence was merely a backdrop to Anton's vibrant life. To my grandson, Anton Sergeyevich, the lawyer intoned, I bequeath the 3-bedroom apartment at 15 Leninsky Prospect, Moscow. Anton raised a triumphant eyebrow and cast a fleeting, contemptuous glance at Olga. She forced herself to remain calm, though inside she was seething. She'd hoped, against all odds, for some semblance of fairness. And to my granddaughter, Olga Sergeyevna. He continued. I leave the house in the village of Zareka, with all its outbuildings and surrounding land. Olga felt the blood drain from her face. Zareka, a crumbling relic she barely remembered from childhood visits. It had to be a mistake. What was she supposed to do with a falling, apart house in the middle of nowhere? Anton burst out laughing. Well, Olga, at least you got something. You really thought Grandma would leave you anything worthwhile. Enjoy chopping firewood. Resentment cold in Olga's throat. She felt humiliated and insulted. Why had her grandmother done this? Did she truly think Olga so worthless that all she deserved was an old house in a remote village? After the reading, events moved quickly. Anton, pleased with himself, hurried off without looking back. Don't forget to sell that wreck, taxes will eat you alive. He called over his shoulder. The lawyer handed Olga the documents, and a heavy bunch of rusty keys. Leaving the office, she was greeted by her husband, Igor. He looked grim and irritated. So, what happened? He asked without even a greeting. Olga explained. Igor's frown deepened with each word. When she finished, he exploded. A house in a village. Are you serious? Olga, can't you do anything useful for once? A Moscow apartment, that's a real opportunity. And you got this junk. You're just unlucky. A total failure. His words cut deeper than Anton's mockery. She had always tried to be a good wife, supporting and loving him, but he had never appreciated her. Igor, please. She began, but he cut her off. Nuff. I'm tired of your uselessness. Pack your things and get out. I'm done carrying you. Tears welled in Olga's eyes, but she held them back. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Silently, she packed her few belongings, and left the apartment they had shared. With no money and nowhere else to go, Olga bought a bus ticket to Zareka. She didn't care what awaited her in that godforsaken village. She just needed to escape the deceit and betrayal. The journey was long and exhausting. The bus rattled over potholes, gray landscapes flashed by. Olga stared out the window, lost in thought. She remembered her grandmother's kind eyes and soft voice. Maybe there was something in that old house, something that would help her understand herself, and find a new path in life. When the bus finally arrived in Zarecha, dusk was falling. The village greeted her with eerie silence. The houses were crooked, their paint peeling as if time had stopped here. Dragging her suitcase, Olga followed a narrow path to the house. It loomed before her, a sad ghost of the past, its shutters sagging and the yard overgrown. Inside, however, the house was surprisingly clean and orderly, as if someone had been preparing it for her. The rooms smelled of old wood and dust, but not of decay. The furniture, though aged, was sturdy and well kept. Yellowed photographs framed unfamiliar faces on the walls, and Olga felt the weight of her family's history watching her. In a far corner, a small storage door caught her eye. It was tightly shut, blending almost seamlessly with the wall. After some effort, she shifted the rusted lock. The creak of the hinges echoed through the house, and Olga's heart pounded. Behind that door wasn't just a closet, it was a hidden room filled with books. Floor to ceiling shelves held journals, letters, and keepsakes. On a dusty desk lay a leather-bound diary with her grandmother's name embossed on the cover. Olga's hands trembled as she opened it. As she began to read, the dusty air of Zareka seemed to come alive with Grandma Maria's voice, and Olga realized that this old house might be her greatest inheritance yet. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with volumes of all sizes and colors. Some were bound in leather with gold embossing, others wore simple paper covers. The room was so cleverly hidden it could easily have been mistaken for an ordinary pantry. There were no windows, but small vents ensured a steady airflow, preventing moisture buildup. Olga froze at the threshold, stunned by the sight. She had no idea her grandmother kept a library, let alone one this vast. All her life, she'd pictured Grandma as a simple village woman, busy with household chores. But this hidden room spoke of something else: intelligence, education, and a passion for knowledge. Stepping inside, Olga ran her hand along the spines. Her fingers felt the roughness of old leather, and the silkiness of paper. The scent of ancient books was intoxicating, transporting her to another world. A world of discovery. Though never much of a reader, in that moment she felt an overwhelming urge to uncover every secret hidden behind those covers. Some volumes were in Russian, others in French or German, languages she'd studied in school. To her amazement, she even spotted books in Latin and ancient Greek. She lifted a leather-bound tome and opened it. Yellowed pages revealed clear, legible text. It was a historical work printed in the 15th century. Hours passed as Olga examined each shelf, wondering how her grandmother had amassed such a collection. She sensed this library wasn't merely a hobbyist's treasure, it was part of her heritage. A key to understanding her family, and herself. It felt as if Grandma had left her this secret room just for her. Eager to learn more, Olga continued her exploration. In the large, dry basement, surprisingly well kept for an old house, she found an old tarp covering something metal and imposing. Pulling back the fabric revealed a massive safe with a combination lock. At first, she tried in vain to open it. Then she remembered Grandma's little quirk: she never forgot any grandchild's birthday. Olga carefully dialed her own birthdate, and heard a satisfying click as the lock yielded. Inside lay neatly bundled letters, photographs, documents, and notebooks, tied together with a faded ribbon. Olga's heart raced as she lifted the top bundle. The letters were from Grandma herself, explaining everything. Why Anton received the apartment at number 15 Leninsky Prospect in Moscow, and why Olga had inherited this old house in Zareka. She learned that fairness wasn't always about equal property, but about giving each grandchild what suited them best. Anton, who prized material success, would benefit most from a city apartment. Olga, rooted in history and family lore, had been entrusted with the house and its library so she could preserve their legacy. Further documents confirmed that many volumes were not only culturally priceless, but also of considerable monetary value. Some had belonged to a noble family before the revolution, others were once owned by Emperor Alexander II himself. Yet the photographs touched her most. Snapshots of childhood afternoons reading by the fireplace, gathering berries in the forest, and baking pies together. In each faded image, Olga saw the love in her grandmother's eyes. As she unfolded the final yellowed letter, Olga felt tears of understanding rather than resentment. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. True inheritance is memory, history, and connection to one's roots. In that moment, surrounded by books and letters, Olga realized she had everything she needed to begin again. They streamed down her cheeks. Hot, plentiful tears that washed away every trace of resentment, disappointment, and insecurity. These were not tears of despair, but of realization she was not alone. She had roots, a family, and a grandmother who loved her and believed in her. In leaving her this house and its hidden library, her grandmother had bequeathed far more than brick and mortar. She had bequeathed love, wisdom, and faith. She had given Olga the key to her own heart and soul. Wiping her tears, Olga studied the photographs again. Now she saw not merely images but a reflection of her own story and destiny. She knew her place was here, in the flea house, in this quiet village. Here she would find herself. Here she would find meaning. Here she would be happy. Olga made a firm decision: she would not sell the house. That resolve took root in her soul, pushing out doubt and fear. She would stay in Zarecha, breathe life into these old walls, and restore the home to its former glory. Not for money, nor as revenge against her brother, but for herself, for the little girl in those yellowed photos who had once clung so trustingly to her grandmother. Her first task was to find a restorer. At first, the locals were wary, but when Agafia, the elderly neighbor, saw Olga's genuine passion, she recommended Ivan, a craftsman from the next village. He has golden hands, Agafia said. Ivan inspected the house, shook his head, and then smiled. There's a lot of work, he admitted. But the structure is solid. It'll last for generations. Relieved, Olga agreed on a price and a timeline. Work would begin in 1 week. Next, she tackled the library's appraisal. Realizing she needed experts, Olga located several antique bookstores in Moscow and emailed photos of her most intriguing volumes. Within days, one shop sent Kirill, a young specialist, to evaluate the collection in person. He studied each shelf, jotting notes in his notebook. Finally, he looked up. You have a true treasure here, he said. Some of these books are unique, priceless really. When Olga asked for a rough value, Kirill hesitated, then replied. At least the worth of a 3-bedroom apartment in the capital, and that's just one volume. Overwhelmed, Olga thanked him. Kirill offered to oversee the appraisal and sale, through auctions or private collectors, if she chose to sell. But Olga was undecided. She might sell a few, sell many, or perhaps transform the house into a museum. That same day, Olga phoned Uncle Petya, her grandmother's friend's son, whose number she'd found in the safe's address book. He remembered her fondly. Your grandmother always said, the greatest wealth isn't money, but but memory. He told her. He offered advice and introductions to help navigate legal paperwork and historical research. Olga felt a surge of relief. She was not alone. That evening, her phone rang. It was Anton. "How's life out there in the sticks?" he teased. Olga replied calmly, "Fine. And you, how's the apartment?" Anton paused. "Look, maybe we fussed over the inheritance for nothing. What if we swap? You take the flat, I'll take the house." Olga smiled. "I've decided I'm happy right where I am. This house holds something far more valuable than a city apartment." A silence followed. Anton muttered, "Fine. Don't come crying to me later," and hung up. Olga stood by the window, listening to the crackle of logs in the fireplace. Shadows danced on the walls as she felt an unfamiliar sense of freedom, confidence, and pride. She was the master of her fate, her home, and her inheritance. And she knew whatever tomorrow held, she could handle it. She returned to the fireplace, opened an ancient book, and began to read. With every line, she sank deeper into her family's past. A world she was only now beginning to understand and cherish. Here, surrounded by history, Olga had found her purpose. And as she closed the book that night, she believed with all her heart, she could do anything.